Polypede Works here, coming to you once again with One Piece chapter 1143 entitled Holy Knights. So, we don't have a continuation of the cover story this week, but we do have the crew doing some wave race on some flying fish, much like the flying fish of the Flying Fish Riders right before Sabaody Archipelago started, right? And everybody is on a fish. Some of them are playing Mario Kart Double Dash as they are doubling up, but Jinbei is in the water as a doodle because drawing his kimono has to be a pain, because this is one of many times in which he is out of the shot, and I find it very funny each and every time it happens. So, moving on, we are at the Walrus School, in which the children are being led away by Gunko's arrow. Saul describes the arrow as a cloth, which makes sense because the first time we saw the ability, it appeared to be like bandages, and I even call them bandages, and Gunko seems to have bandages around her mouth, so that's weird. Also, the ghost thing wearing the hat and the malicious thundercloud seem to be attacking the school, which is crazy. When Saul goes to touch one of the children, whom we find out is Jarl's great-great-granddaughter, Yveltal? I cannot pronounce her name. When he goes to touch her, he gets stabbed with this weird thorny force that impales his hand and makes the pain very severe. So, then some more War School children fall asleep. Everyone around Elbaf is reacting. We get an introduction to a new type of Denden Mushi, which is a giant type Denden Mushi, translated here as a telediction snail. And it's huge. It's about the same size as Jinbei. It's really big. So that's cool that Elbaf has their own Denden Mushi. And looking at the table here and comparing them to the giants, they're about the relative size a normal person would be to a Denden Mushi. So that's interesting. I wonder if they have really big projector Denden Mushi here. That's something to think about. But yeah, a fire starts and we got some firefighters going in to put out the fire, but they are smacked down by the Draugr that was summoned last chapter, the giant skeleton wearing Elbafian garb. And looking at this thing, it's massive because it's bigger than the boat and bigger than the giants. So yeah, their skeever gets knocked out of the air and they are donezo. Crazy. So no one's around now to put out the fire. We cut to the giants freaking out, which then translates into the Holy Knights having a nice dinner in the middle of this clearing, right? So we find out that Saint Sommers, is a thorn fruit user, and he is called a Briar Man. So, from the looks of his ability, and I was wrong about this, by the way, because I had said in a previous video, I thought he was a mythical cat fruit user. No, not the case at all. So, big wrong on that. Big L. It's all right. Maybe there'll be a mythical cat fruit user in the future. But what's interesting about his ability is that it reminds me, oh man, because I want to say there have been fruits like this, kind of like, say, I want to say like Bartolomeo's fruit, in which it produces a force. Or you know what, like Law's fruit too. Law's a good example as well, in which you have a force being produced. Because he's not like, say, Gunko or Doflamingo. It doesn't seem like he's producing a solid object, but it's like he has these thorns around his arm, and it looks like a vine with thorns like you would find on a rose. And he even compares his ability to love has his roses and thorns, so he even compares his ability kind of to a rose. But what's interesting about this is that I wonder how far this ability goes, because this can't be the only thing that it does. It has to do more than just cause the love, I guess, karma thing to happen. Because if he can produce thorny vines, he has to be able to do more with that. Like, can he cover his body in thorns, kind of like the spike fruit of Miss Doublefinger? You know, it has to be something else with it. But it is quite interesting that he has such a conceptual ability as hurting people based on how much they love the target. It's very interesting. And then, as he says, if their folks try to touch the children of the Warrior School, then they'll be hurt even more because, of course, you have unconditional love for your children. So that's wild. That's wild. I could kick myself because there were some obvious signs in Summer's design that he was some sort of plant man because he's wearing a corsage and then his sword has some sort of weird thorn motif to it. So, of course, it makes sense for him to have plant powers of some sort, even though they're a bit more, I guess, suggestive or conceptual. So that's cool that they are. It does bring me back to the time in which Marineford was coming out in the manga week to week. And I remember people discussing that everybody thought Aki Inu had some sort of flower power or plant ability because he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and he too had a corsage back then, as he does now. This does too make for some interesting parallels because the eventual plant man that we got is a big fanboy of Aki Inu, Aramaki, otherwise known as Green Bull. He loves Aki Inu. So it's really funny that people thought Aki Inu was a plant man and then the actual plant man became a fan of Aki Inu. So that's funny within itself. This also reminds me of Benz, who was from the movie film Z, who was under Zephyr, and he was the ninja guy that fought Sanji, and he had the Grow fruit, which is a very similar power to what Biblo the owl has, but he can only affect plants. So this is another plant ability in One Piece. And of course, this too reminds me of Aramaki Woods fruit, Green Bull's Woods fruit. But it's not as literal as his fruit, as this power obviously is more conceptual. But seeing as how his sword has some sort of thorn motif to it, talking about Summers now, it is quite interesting that he has this ability and does lend to the idea that there's probably more to it than meets the eye. What's also quite interesting, and we'll talk about this more later, is that he's from the House of Shepherd, which has Jupiter in it. And of course, Jupiter is the deity of agriculture. So it's very funny that he has a plant power and his family member is the deity of agriculture. Just saying, just wanted to point that out before I forget. We're going to do another video based on that solely, but I just want to bring it up here. Anyway, moving on. And then we come to a point in which I was correct.
I was right.
Because, okay, as they're talking, Gunko, who somehow is able to eat food with bandages over her mouth, tells her fellow Holy Knights the path that she's sending the children on with the powers of her arrow fruit, right? But then it appears that Saint Killingham needs some salt for his meal. So he puts Summers to sleep with this weird ring beam of some sort. Summers falls asleep and produces this big thought bubble. Killingham puts his hand in the thought bubble and takes out a plate of salt because he tells Summers before he puts him to sleep that he needs salt. Summers thinks of salt, falls asleep, and then he gets the salt from his thought bubble as he is sleeping. And it is said that St. Killingham has the mythical dragon fruit motto Quillen or Kieran, and he is described as a dream materializing man. So, quick question. Are we done saying that Gear 5th Luffy doesn't have Toon Force? Because the point of contention that people were talking about was that when Gear 5th Luffy did all this Toon Force stuff, it wasn't really proven and it could just be a visual gag for us, the reader, because nobody in the narrative actually interacted with the items that he was creating. However, now we have Saint Killingham doing something very similar as he's making things out of people's dreams and materializing them in the real world. I would also like to point out that I was 100% correct in relating him to Noko from those two video games and that anime filler, because he is both a dragon, which is Noko's dream to become a dragon because he was a seahorse, and because Noko could make a dream world like thing, and he's before Uto was ever introduced, so he could make a dream world like state even though his dream world was not real. So I'm just saying that yes, I was right in relating him to Noko because that's what he basically is. But yeah, so I do think that from Killingham's example, that it's very possible that Gear 5th Luffy is making real objects. They're not just sight gags. So yeah, but we'll see. We'll see. But this is a step towards TOON Force becoming more common. And who knows? This is the only like mythical zone that we're seeing in detail since Gear 5th. I know we had the Gorosei, but they just kind of did stuff. Their powers weren't really fleshed out a whole lot. They'll probably be fleshed out later. But I would say Killingham is the first one that we're actually taking the time to flesh out very thoroughly. And he is awakened. So we'll see. We'll see. But moving on. Because from the meal that they eat and from the salt that Killingham gets from Summer's thought bubble, everything here, including the monsters that Killingham summoned in the previous chapter,
Which I was also right about, just saying.
are all real. They're real. And you see that they're real because Kiba attacked Jormungandr in the last chapter. So they are physical beings. Everything he makes is physical. Which we cut to Gonko having a uwu face over the food she's eating, which makes me automatically like her even more. And kind of is a weird dichotomy because it's funny that she gets flustered at certain things, but the rest of the time she's very, very stoic. But I like that about her. That's cool. And they're planning on escaping Elbaf with the children by guiding the children to the coast and then using their ship to get off of Elbaf in a combination with the Sun Painter Stone they have in their possession. So that's interesting. That's interesting. But apparently, even though they are stuffed from the meal, saying that, yes, the food that they ate was real, it contained 0 calories. Killingham even says, well, it was a dream meal. Ha ha ha. So, of course, it's calorie free. That's so interesting. And I believe that's Gunko asking if the meal was 0 calories. How girly. I like that about her. That's very cute. That's what she warns her fellow Holy Knights, that another ship that was docked was the ship of Emperor Straw Hat Luffy. So they need to be cautious. Which I think is so cool that the Holy Knights are respecting Luffy. It just shows you how far the crew has come, and they're being treated as a real Yonko crew. Really cool. That's really something. Love the character development there. But it's really kind of eerie that they are allowing, apparently, the children to walk into a blazing inferno as the arrow is leading them into the fire, which I guess the arrow itself is immune to fire. That's something that's interesting to think about. But yeah, they're leading them into the blaze and saying that, well, if the fire spreads, it doesn't matter, because if they die, we'll just have the next batch marked over. That's crazy and really wasteful, because if you're looking at the children as a commodity, you're willing to let them die and just get more. Wow. Okay, so we know they're going to be saved at the last moment in the next chapter. Also, no break next week. Just pointing that out. No break next week. Let's move forward. That's when we cut to Loki, who has just recovered from striking the tree of Elbaf and is very winded. And that's what he says, none of you can even lift Ragnir. So Ragnir is Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor from Norse mythology, because he's describing it as it being too heavy to lift, which sets up for Harridan probably being able to lift it later, I think. And maybe some sort of team attack that he performs with his younger brother. So everyone can see that Loki is about to pass out. That's when Luffy hits Loki with a new attack to sort of just push him over. And it's called Gum Gum Arm Balloon. So it's not a Gear 3rd attack. He simply is just inflating his arm, which is something kind of interesting because we've never seen him do this before in this way. Because it's not a bone balloon. Because every time he does a Gear 3rd attack, it's called bone balloon. But here it's just an arm balloon in which he inflates his arm much like he did back in the pre-time skip. And it's just a light punch that pushes Loki over. Cut to Luffy requesting Harridan to treat Loki because he can't stand to watch him die. That then cuts us to Gerd pulling out some blood bags and treating Loki and saying that he won't be fully recovered for several months, which probably isn't true. We probably just need to get the cuff off of him, and his dough fruit will probably aid with his healing, whatever that may be. I have said in the past, I think he could be a resin man or a plastic man, but we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see, because what's interesting here too is that even though we've gotten a very interesting Toon Force using Zoan in this chapter, it's not entirely definite that Loki himself will be a Zoan. I've done videos on that. Go check those out. But yeah, they prop Loki up on some logs and they begin treating him, but we see something very interesting. He doesn't have his hat on. And then in the next panel, we see that, yes, I was right again. Yeah, I just can't stop winning. I just can't stop winning. But it's very interesting that I said the hordes are probably real, and they're real. And it said that it's a mark of the ancient giants. Our father Harold was the same. So what's weird about it is that I wonder, does Haru didn't have horns and he just cut them off? Because it's weird that he doesn't have them. And then in a flashback, we see that Harold has horns. And he says, "You both, my precious sons, I want you to get along when I'm gone and do what you can to support Elbaf." So that's weird that he has them here and he's being so kind to his children, but then he chops them off later to show his resolve and his willingness to trade with other countries. That's weird. So I wonder what the situation is. Or maybe, Haruden was just not born with those horns. Because even in this flashback, we see Loki as a child, which is weird that now we're getting a definite scope of how he looked as a child. And he still has the bandages around his eyes. Why is that? That's so weird that he has bandages around his eyes. And he's carrying a Kanabo club, which is also quite interesting. And he says, as a child, "How could I call such a weak runt my big brother?" And he insults his mother. Loki is terrible. Insults Haruden's blood and everything. And Haruden picks up an axe and is about to kill him in real time. And his fellow New Giant Warrior pirates try to stop him. But no, even though he says, "There's no way I can forgive him. He insulted my mother and killed our father." And that's when Loki says, "Calm down. The Weeping Warrior act is getting old. Do you really think I would kill my own father? Our father. You're too caught up in your own personal drama." Which, we all kind of figured that was the case. We all knew, based on how Loki was presenting himself, that there was more than meets the eye here. But I do wonder, was Harold framed then? Because there's something weird here. Because he does treat both of them equally, but yet and still Haruden wasn't allowed within the palace. But Harold didn't put his foot down and say, "This is my son. I don't care what kind of blood he has," etc., etc. It's really weird. And I still say too that Haruden's uncle most likely is Saul and Haruden is a D. I still say that because it's so weird that when Ohara burned down, Saul had the New Giant Warrior pirates recover all the books. That's so weird. I can't stop thinking about that. And then two, in a chapter in which we're talking about the lineage of Loki and Haruden, Saul is present. I don't know. Could mean nothing, but it's interesting. So we'll have to wait and see. Bit of a short chapter this week. Not a lot is going on here, but a lot happened. We got the dough fruit reveals of Somers and Killingham, so that's pretty good. Also, Loki having real horns confirmed, which I was always of the mind that he did. I probably said that several times at this point. So yeah. I do wonder, though, what Haruden's deal is. Why doesn't he have horns? And he's Harold's direct descendant. That's so odd. Maybe if the blood of his mother being a D, if that's the case, maybe that stops it, which is weird. But I don't know. We don't have a lot of information about giant genealogy. We just got that little taste that if you have ancient giant blood in you, you have horns. And his are big, too. They're big and black. And they were colored black in the recent color release of Loki. So yeah, his horns are black, which is kind of a rarity. Not even Kaido had black horns. So that's interesting within itself. But with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Interesting chapter, bit of a short chapter. Glad we got some Devil Fruit confirmations. And yeah, Somerset has a weird paramecia fruit. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What's it?